Okay, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to talk about classes and IDs here. So what we end up doing with classes and IDs, we uniquely identify elements. And if you haven't looked at that PowerPoint that I posted on Moodle, if you were absent, go back and look at that because we're going to talk about some of these terms that were in that PowerPoint. So what do classes and IDs do? They uniquely identify elements. So what I have here is I just have a paragraph of text that's here, and then I also have a little bit of H1s here, and I have 6 H1s that were here, and we're going to use these to add classes and IDs to. So the first thing that we'll talk about is ID. So an ID uniquely identifies an element as being different, and it's like what's in your wallet. All right, your ID. If you go to the store and you buy like a beer or something, they ask you for your ID, and that ID uniquely identifies you. And there's no one else that has that same ID other than you. All right, it uniquely identifies one individual, and that's how IDs work in code also. It uniquely identifies one element. So if you remember, we talked about the div tag, and just a live preview to show you something. If I take a look here and I scale my window back and forth, you'll see that my code is going everywhere. It's pretty much has no filter. If it's as long as a wall, it would keep going if the text would allow it. And this is not what we want here. So one of the things that we do is we group all of our content together. And we're going to use the div tag. And if you remember what the div tag was, it literally groups your content. All right? It groups content. That's literally all it does. And this div tag is going to be extremely, extremely special because it's literally grouping all of our content. And we'll use IDs a lot, but the concept is it's uniquely identifying this div. We'll end up having 10, 15 divs on a site, on a page, and we need to uniquely identify those as being different if they are different. So in this case, let's go in and write an open caret, and then let's say div. All right. Now, this div is grouping our entire page. And if you remember, just to go back to what we looked at, we're trying to contain this. Right now, it's almost like if you had a dog and, he starts to go, or she goes into the neighbor's yard, you put a fence up to tell it like, yo, this is your territory, you can't go out of this area. And that's almost what we need to do here in this case. So we're going to use a div to do this. So what we need to do is take this closing div here and place it down here at the bottom. All right, so this is like the fence now. So everything that we add at this point is going to go in between this opening and closing div tag. Now this div is extremely special. All right, and this is where IDs come in hand. There's no div like this because it's grouping all of our content together. So we need to give it an ID. So if I hit space inside of the div and I say ID, all right, and then we're going to say equals, and we know after equals there's always quotation marks. All right, and you can put whatever name you want inside of the div or the class that you're creating inside the quotation marks. We can name this whatever, but this one has a specific name, and we call it a wrapper. All right, simply because it's wrapping all of our content together here. Now, if I live preview this, we'll see that nothing has actually happened. But we've sort of put the fence up. We just haven't put the boards in, and that's the rules here. So we need to go to the style sheet and write some rules. And the way that we write it for this ID, this div ID, you write the name that's in the quotation marks. Now, what's in the quotation marks goes in here in the CSS. So what I'll need to do before you code wrapper, instead of just writing wrapper, whenever you're coding for an ID in the CSS, you have to put a hashtag first, and then I'll say wrapper. And we're going to give this wrapper 2 rules. The first one that we're going to give it is a max width. Alright, and we talked about this in class, so this is almost like a refresher, but max width pretty much says you can be anything under this number, but you can't extend this number. It's almost like putting that fence right at your property line, and then right after that you say, hey buddy, you can't go no further. That's literally what this is, and the value is 960 pixels. Alright, and the reason we use that is because it'll fit on most desktops and even most tablets. But for your portfolio, we might extend that a little bit, but for now, we'll leave it at 960 pixels. So if I go in, look at what has happened. It's going, it's going, it's going, and it stops. All right. Now, I know you can't answer this through the video as you're watching it, but what's aesthetically wrong with this? Well, it's not centered. So what we need to do is move this. And there's a rule to move something, and this is called margin. So just think of M for move. So if I say margin, this is moving an element. We can move it left, right, up, down. But what we want to do is make sure that this wrapper or all our content is centered. So there's something to center content, and the value is 0 auto. So margin 0 auto will center anything that you want when you are trying to create this. Alright, so now if I hit save, preview, you can see that now our content is centered. So we did a couple of things in this video. One, we created a div to group all of our content, but we gave it a special identifier of an ID, saying that it's different from every element of the page, and we called it wrapper. And then we went to the CSS and we put a hashtag wrapper, and remember, hashtag goes before any ID name, so I said hashtag wrapper, and we gave it a max width of 960 pixels, meaning that it can't go further than 960 pixels, and we gave it a margin 0 auto, which means that it centers our content.